It's 4:30.
Bill Stiff?
I'd like to call to order the work session on Monday, the 28th. And as I look around the table, we're minus a few people right now. We have Wally Campbell is gone, but she will be calling in if the system works by the regular meeting to be a part of the business meeting. I don't think Councilman Osborne will be here at this meeting. We're hoping that she will be at the next meeting. If not, she will call in. That's what I've been told. So, and then following this, there's going to be a work session, a regular meeting. I just want you to know I am going to call for a break during that. It depends on, now I'm not sure how the evening's going to go in the length of time, but at the beginning we thought this meeting would go very late. So what we were going to do, Kim, I hope you don't mind, we were going to stop you at 5:30 so they can go back and have something to eat, because we have people that come from work, and if we're late, then they're up here fidgeting because they're hungry. So if you'll be understanding, at 5:30 I will call that, okay? So let's get started. We will have one item on, yes?
It's me first.
Oh, well, just a minute. We will have one item on the work session agenda. The council will receive information on and discuss the estimate fiscal year 14-15 expenditures. Kim Bradford, interim budget research manager, to present, but I believe our city manager has something to say beforehand. Brian?
Yes, thank you, Mayor, members of the council. I'll actually be doing the kickoff for this portion of the presentation, and then I will be turning it over to our most capable interim budget manager, Kim Bradford, after I hit the first handful of slides. But the one thing is this is very important tonight. Tonight we bring the expenditures forward for council consideration, and we know that there will be discussion tonight as well. And I do want to just stop real quickly and thank staff for a lot of work on this. There's been a data gathering, review, discussions. We went through the prioritizations, the evaluations, and I just want to commend not only the budget staff but also director team, the deputy city managers, and a lot of other staff as well. So point is, a lot of work that's gone into this prioritization and the recommendations you'll be receiving from management. We have allocated an hour and a half for this work session. Mayor, as you indicated, we would be taking a break before the regular meeting. Fully anticipate we'll reconvene on whatever we don't cover. So if the public's listening, there's a good chance we'll be hitting the rest later.
Yeah, and if I may add, I didn't add it for the public, but we have to start the regular meeting at 6 o'clock. So what we'll do is, after the regular meeting is completed, then we'll go back into our work session. Thank you, Brian. Go ahead.
You bet. So you've gotten, for about a week and a half ago, you got the information on the supplementals, had a chance to review. We've also, back in March, where we had the previous work session on the capital improvement plan, and we have taken council direction, and you'll be seeing that tonight as well. But our goal is to talk at a high level, and certainly want to make sure that council has every opportunity to have discussions, questions of management and staff as we go through this. Because at the end of the day, this is a point where we really need clear direction from council, because if you go to the next slide, Kim, thank you very much, you're anticipating. If you go to the next slide, you'll see, where we're at tonight is this is the expenditures and the supplementals and CIP. This coming Wednesday, we'll have a public budget forum that will invite the public to ask management questions of the budget as well. But next Monday, May 5th, is when we actually have the draft budget review for council. So again, very important that as we get direction from council tonight, we'll have an opportunity to refine and get prepared up for the May 5th meeting. So it's been a journey. You can see by all the steps we've taken so far. I do want to point out on the one, April 21st, where it talked about the revenue projections. We actually, that was last week, we had an opportunity to talk about health care and compensation. The direction we received from the council last week is what you'll see reflected in tonight's expenditure proposal. And then as we continue to go through this, we have May 12th. If needed, if the council would like to have an additional time to spend on the budget, we have every opportunity to do that. Otherwise, May 19th, we go right into the tentative budget adoption, and that sets our upper expenditure limitations. So you can see we're well into this, and it's worked well. And I would, the last thing I would reflect, if you go to the very top box in November, was really at that point when we had the council retreat that gave staff a lot of direction, and we have used that throughout this process. So we believe that we've hit most of the marks, and as we talk with council tonight, we'll be finding out if there's any more direction. So the agenda, again, high-level review. We have the supplementals, the proposed operating budgets, and that will be for all funds, general fund and the entire operating budget. At the point where we get to the departmental operating budget reviews, that will be for council discussion as we go through the supplementals. And then you can see through the rest of it, we'll have other initiatives, CIP, and the CIP, you've been given a new spreadsheet for that will go through with a couple of changes made. Debt review, and then finally we'll get into the next steps. This slide, hard to read for the public, hard to read for me from here as well, but this is one where it tries to give us a high-level review of the initiatives, and it will actually talk about that, everything from the staffing, facilities, et cetera. And as we go through this, the point of all this, and we'll go through this in more detail later, the point is we know we need to meet the demands for growth. And the ways in which we do that, it's not only to through our authorized FTEs, but we're looking at additional staff that I'll be talking about in just a moment. And it's looking at the workload indicators. We have grown as a city. We have not grown as staff. And we're looking at opportunities where if the evaluation is that our growth is at a certain level and we're not sure it's sustainable, we are going to look at filling it temporarily. So that's certainly a tactic that we use as well. We have incorporated elements of the citizen satisfaction survey in here, and that will be reviewed by council next Monday night. We came out well as a city by our citizens, and we're actually, again, looking at where we can continue to provide a high level of services to our citizens, also to allow for growth. But I would say from a staff management perspective, we're also looking at taking care of what I consider our most valuable asset, and that's our personnel, our staff, our employees. So you'll see that as we go through. The elements we're investing in technology. You'll see that in the supplementals, both in staffing and also in projects. So part of that is we know that that's been a very key initiative at council. It's been in our strategic action plan, and one of the things we're getting more excited about as the days go on is our enterprise resource planning system. There's been a lot of work on that, and presentations have been made by potential suppliers for that, and we have more this week. We've continued to, as relates to technology, our fiber projects, and it's one of those things where we as a city, as we're putting the fiber in the ground, is really going to, I think, set the stage for us longer term, because as we get it in now, it will only help our traffic transportation, just a lot of elements in technology that you get in the ground early, so you don't have to tear it up later. We are, as I talked about, we have FTEs that will relate to technology, and a lot of that is we're getting programs that we're using more, SCADA, Project Docs, Lucity, which is our asset management system, again tied to the technology that we will be have available to us, and now we need the manpower to be able to implement it. So asset management, you've heard some talk of that, but asset management is taking care of what we have. It's nothing more simple than that. We have a lot of investment in this community, and we have to take care of what we have, whether it be parks, roads, equipment, buildings, etc. So you will see that's incorporated into the budget as well as far as asset management. And regrettably, as we went through the recession, we had to rein that back. We were not able to, in my opinion, be able to maintain at the level that we are proud of. and we really want to get that turned around so it doesn't get out in front of us too far to where it's very hard, very costly to manage our assets and take care of them and maintain them. The sense of community and quality of life, some of the areas there you'll see in public safety, we are looking at adding 2 new police officers, patrol officers. Our evidence management program through the facility that we just purchased, and we will be now doing the tenant improvements for that. We're also looking at hiring a forensic specialist, so that's the areas of sense of community or quality of life, if you will. We want to take care of our medians. We want to enhance them, provide enhancements, put the plant materials in and the DG, if you will. We also want, because the look of the community is very important to us, parks, pool, recreation, et cetera. And again, several of these things actually popped up through the citizen satisfaction survey. So, the next slide is population growth funded FTEs. This is a slide that you'll look at the bar chart and it actually shows the purple bars are population growth. Then you look at the black boxes in there and that actually shows our employees per thousand population, and that's a pretty good indicator that you compare mostly against yourself and in some cases other communities. But you'll see that we've actually dropped our employee count per thousand over time. Our highest point on FTEs in 09, since our highest FTE point in 09, our population's actually increased by 20%. 20%, so large growth in population. But our FTEs, which are full-time equivalent employees, is decreased by 8%. So we have not been, we have not been keeping up with growth as it relates strictly to an FTE count. We are at a point now this year where we're recommending 16 new positions. This actually takes us back to fiscal year 09 levels, back to 527, which is the count that we had in fiscal year 2009. So that's what we are proposing. That's a 3% increase in employee growth to get us up to that level. But I think as importantly, our ratio is staying pretty much the same. We're only going to 7.18 per thousand population versus 7.16. So it's staying very close to that, again, managing through the growth. So we have looked at the positions, we've looked at workload indicators, if they're new programs, we really tried to provide the supporting information and certainly can be talked about. We have our directors here tonight that can answer those questions as we get there as well. So this is just a high-level summary of the authorized positions. Again, this will be in more detail as we get into the departmental supplementals, which will be in Kim Bradford's portion of the presentation. But I wanted to have them all in one slide where you could see this in front of you. Again, a total of 16 positions that we're looking at. It's also important to point out that, and I shared it with council probably the last year and a half or so, that we felt that it was a time to where, we were repurposing positions. We actually repurposed 30 positions over the last year and a half. And what that means is there are vacancies as we look at where the needs are and do we have a position that may be open where we can use it for something else. We've done that. And we're kind of out of, we're out of the ability to do repurposing, especially on a large scale. So it's one now where it just is problematic. Every one of our positions that is vacant right now, we're recruiting. So we have come to the point where it's absolutely, I believe, vital that we do add these new positions. Healthcare, again, healthcare and compensation we talked about last Monday, so I won't spend much time on this, other than it's important to point out that we have kept the direction that we received from council. Healthcare, we're going with what we called option 1. That is increasing $818,000, which is about 11.32% increase to the city, but also to the employees on average. So that's one where We believe that we heard you and are taking that direction. The other you'll see up in there, we have what we call MOUs, or Memos of Understanding, with our police department and our fire department sworn personnel. That by contract is a 5% increase for them. This will be to their base. Neither of those two groups added to their base last year, so it is going to their base this year. For the non-sworn, we're looking at 3% averages. And you can see the ongoing expense there is $648,000 for that we're projecting. So with that, I will turn it over to Kim Bradford, and she will take the balance of the presentation. But I do want to, again, we want this to be interactive tonight. So as there's questions, we do want to hear those because it's very important for us to get this direction tonight. But thank you.
Thank you, Brian, and thank you, Mayor and Council, for the opportunity to present to you this evening. As Brian mentioned, I will be going over the proposed expenditures for both the general fund and the enterprise. I'm going to start with some high levels, so by fund I will talk about what the overall proposed expenditures are for general fund and then the enterprise funds. That'll be at a very high level, and then what I'll do is I'll actually go through each department, and I will pause after each slide. I will review what the proposed budget is for each department, highlight a couple of the supplementals. I won't go into a lot of detail because you've received a lot of information beforehand, and as Brian mentioned, really want to make sure we're using the time to allow discussion or answering questions. So I will do that. I will allow for discussion after each one, and then I will go through the capital improvement plan, what we've updated since the March 3rd work session, and then round it out with the city's debt service and an update on that. So starting with our general fund, you will see that we have a total proposed general fund expenditure of $74.7 million. On the bottom, I've highlighted in blue what we call our general fund operating budget, and that's really the majority of those three categories that you see up there, the personnel, contractual, and commodities. And so frequently when we talk about our general fund operating budget, that's the majority of our departments and what they conduct as far as their day-to-day operations that are supported by the general fund. I wanted to highlight in the transfers and debt section what makes up that 16% difference from the operating, and that has a couple things. So we've talked last week about the revenues. So we have the transfer from the general fund that's for the stadium, and that includes both the debt service and the operations. We have the highway user revenue fund, and so that is also to supplement the state shared revenue that we receive for that program, which is really our streets program. And then we also have a transfer for the construction sales tax. We have the 1% differential above our general sales tax rate, and so council adopted a policy to apply those funds over to the capital improvement plan, and so that transfer reflects that as well.
Mayor.
For water, we have a total... Joe?
Just for clarification for me, on that general fund expenditure by type, is the $74.7 million, does that both include ongoing and one-time?
Correct.
Okay, so operating would be the 62.9, but you still have to take the transfers out of that for the ballpark and some of the other things to get down your ongoing operating, supposedly.
Yes, and what we'll do when we get to the department section, I've highlighted both the ongoing and the one-time, because the supplementals we are recommending shows the specific amount of their operating budget that's one-time as well. We'll also have that in the department schedules, and we're incorporating that into the budget book this year so we can be very clear about what's base. Regarding water, we have a total proposed expenditure of $11.9 million. And again, we'll talk about the operating budget, so you'll hear that 5.7, and that's what supports the day-to-day operations, the personnel, contractual, and commodities. And then we have the transfers, which is $700,000, and that actually is transferred to the general fund, and that's to support the operations in the general fund that support those activities in the water department. And then our debt service, which is $5.5 million, that's the remaining piece of that pie. The wastewater picture looks very similar. Again, we have the total of $12.1 million, and of that, the operating budget portion is $5.2 million. And again, we have the same transfer concept for the wastewater fund, that is $1.2 million. And then our debt service portion there is $5.7, and that's for previously issued bonds. Sanitation looks a little bit different. We have a total of $6.7 million as far as our expenditures go. The operating portion of that is much larger portion at $5.8 million as far as operations go. There's no debt service here, and so that's the biggest difference between this and the other enterprise funds. And then the transfers in this area are the $900,000 to the general fund. On the stadium, we have a total of $9.5 million. That operating portion is $4.1 million. And you'll see on this slide, again, the debt service, that's more than half of the total expenditures for the stadium. We also included on here, we had some dialogue in previous work sessions with council about what is the total operating cost and what services may be supported by other departments that's not captured in the stadium budget. So I've noted on here, we have a total operating budget of 4.1 that does reflect, we'll see a one-time supplemental in that area of just over $100,000. So their base budget is $4 million. I noted on there, as we discussed last week, that that does include the $250,000 capital replacement fund obligation that we have per development agreements that is within their operating budget. And then we've talked about the public safety overtime, which is budgeted in the police and fire departments that support the ballpark, and that's about $100,000 as we've talked about. And then we talked about facilities support, that there is a level of support budgeted in the facilities department that is directly attributable to the ballpark. And so you'll see on there, we have, as far as staff goes, about $77,000. That is one FTE in facilities that is dedicated full-time to the ballpark. And then we also estimate about 300 hours per year in just general support for activities. There's also a level of commodities in facilities, so whether it's repairs, things like that, that are estimated at about $40,000 that also contribute to the stadium. And those are budgeted in those respective departments.
Bill?
Kim, just out of curiosity, if this facilities person is dedicated to the ballpark, why is that person not working for the ballpark?
I am not sure if
somebody
there's
answer that?
historical perspective.
Yes,
on- yeah.
Nathan, if we could have you answer that question, please.
It was the first I've heard we even had someone from facilities over there kind of dedicated, so that,
Right.
Last-minute question.
When we initially set the budget up, we looked at having that position within the ballpark budget and reporting in the ballpark structure. However, given the nature of the business and the specialized nature of facilities management in general, we felt it would be best in the facilities division where they can further support that position as needed. So it was purely an operational decision to place that in the within the facilities budget.
so the oversight of this individual is best done by the facilities staff while their work is performed at that particular location?
That is correct.
Okay. Is there a way that, in the future, that we can show these 100,000 and 77,000 expenditure, that becomes more of a part of the conversation rather than an afterthought every year? Because I think we've had this question come up a couple of times over the last few years about how much extra are we supporting from the general fund budget into there, so.
Yes,
I think it helps tell the story.
Yes, we can note that in future conversations as far as what other city departments contribute to the operations of the ballpark.
Okay, thanks. Was that your answer, Bob?
Shopping.
Most of it.
And then lastly, the high-level review before we get into specific departments is our Highway User Revenue Fund, commonly referred to as HERF, and that is in support of our streets program. So you'll see here we do have a total expenditure of $6 million, and that is all attributable to the operations of that division. We do have the personnel, contractual, and commodities, as is with the other funds. And then what's unique to this fund is the $800 street overlay, and that you will see in the department level slide when we get there. That was put through as a supplemental. That is our pavement management program, and that's something that we typically fund every year, and it's consistent with what we've done previously. So following that high-level review, as I mentioned, I'm going to get into department specifics. I will cover some key points on the slides and then look to see if there's any questions, discussion, or direction to give to staff as far as follow-up. I did put on this slide the strategic priorities for the council, and this is not only for our strategic action plan, but also our key results as defined in our priority-based budgeting. And what you'll see as we go through the slides that we have those little symbols that correlate to those categories, and that way you can see the supplementals that are being recommended and how they support those strategic initiatives. If there's anything, like I said, I'm only going to touch on a couple things.
Excuse me.
Yeah, before you get started, so when you're done with that statement, then I'll, if it's all right.
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead and finish.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I'm going to touch on a couple of the supplementals that are recommended, but please feel free to ask questions about anything in that particular department, as we want to make sure that's the time to get council direction.
Do you want to say this now, or you want to wait?
No, right now, before we get started.
All right, go ahead, Bill.
I'm not sure if I'm directing this to my council partners here or everyone on staff, but since last Thursday evening, they have been responding to 23 questions that I generated. And I thought a little bit of explanation why you're not going to hear all 23 of them repeated again tonight might be appropriate. We've always said that budget approval is our most significant policy decision that this council will make all year long. And taking that charge very seriously, look through the budget items. I think when I started this, I probably had half of the questions that I had going into it, some of which I thought I knew the answers to, and some of which I wasn't quite sure, so I figured I better ask. I spent the last week working with another community out of state and have worked with a council that has been seated for at least 15 years, who has gone through rapid growth. And this community has been through a number of managers, and they've been through a number of processes. And when we asked them about their ability to sustain their operation going forward, I was amazed at the number of council members who said, "I don't know," or "I hope so," which was scary to me, that we have an elected body, and I know they're not the only one on the planet that has that answer, but it was very scary to me. Now, having said that, the other thing that this council and this community does not have are the financial policies that we currently have in place. Had they had those, they might have a better answer, they may have a better feel for where they were at. But what that did for me in a very bizarre kind of way, and many of you know me by now, know that that's how that works. But it really pushed me to say, I'm going to approve actually a little over $8 million of expenditures, $3 million of ongoing, and almost $5 million of one-time. And boy, I better know exactly what I'm getting for my $8 million. And I felt that that was my obligation. So in that's the explanation. For many of you, I apologize for the extra work that you've gone through the last 48 hours or 96 hours. But if I didn't ask the questions, I couldn't know in my heart that we were proceeding forward. So for those of you that answered the questions, and those of you that didn't, I appreciate all the work that you did to go through it. So don't be shocked when I sit here and say nothing, because I got a lot of the answers, what I needed from the staff work, and that I am very, very grateful for, which is yet another reason why, when it comes to the end of the day, I can look at this budget and feel very confident that when someone asks me, can we sustain this operation, I can confidently say yes. So before we go through, I wanted everybody to know that ahead of time and know how much I appreciated the effort that you've gone through. That's it.
Thank you, well said, and needed. Okay? All right. Joe?
Just to piggyback on what you had said, mine wasn't necessarily in a form of question, but a 2-hour discussion with the city manager. I probably have a It's a little different perspective because I used to do some of this, so some of it I know, some of it's just for clarification. But I appreciate the 2 hours we spent going through those for clarifications for those questions I had. So again, I agree with you. It's important to make sure you understand what you're actually voting on. And a lot of it I thought I knew, but when I got clarification on something, it was not exactly like I thought it was, which was okay because that's what I was kind of looking for. So again, I appreciate the time they do and the detail in getting that information to us, because I feel like I want to make sure that, and I'm sure the rest of the council does the same thing, that the citizens are getting their best bang for the dollar. And again, if you look at the FTEs over the period of time, we've done a good job coming through this recession, managing the people and still providing, obviously, those high-quality services as spelled out in our citizen satisfaction survey. We're doing more with less, and we're still maintaining those levels. So a lot of that, kudos to the manager, kudos to staff for keeping that up through these, challenging times, so to speak. Thank you.
I'd just like to confirm that, staff has done a great job. They spent a lot of time. And yes, this was extraordinary work for them, Bill, definitely. I'd never seen anybody ask quite so many questions, but with your explanation of where you've been, you were in a learning and a teaching mode to another council, so it would have brought up things probably that we would not have thought unless we were put in that position. And since that's not my career field and it is yours, and is your future career field, I can see where you discovered that there were some things that you weren't certain about and that you needed to know. So again, I don't think it was a trust on Bill's part. It was just information that he wanted. It was a lot of information, and it took a lot of hours for each of you to do. And I read them all, and so I really appreciate the detail in which you answered each of the partial and full questions in this, because it's very important. So we don't all think the same, we don't all feel the same on this council, and so this is a prime example of it. We're all at different levels, and we're all interested in different things. Granted, the budget is the most important thing we do vote on, and I granted that. So again, thank you for that. Okay, let's go ahead. Kim?
Thank you, Council. And with that, we'll start off with our public safety areas. So we have our police department budget at $17.4 million. You will see a note there that it does include our towing fund, and I just point that out only because it does have a corresponding revenue source that offsets those. That's about $114,000, but that is within that budget. And then our fire department at $13.2 million. Regarding these supplementals, we do have 4 of our recommended positions falling in the public safety area. As mentioned by our city manager earlier, we are recommending 2 new officers for patrol. We have a forensic specialist that's recommended for our evidence management program, and then a fire inspector 2, which is a civilian position in the fire department, in the fire prevention division specifically. We also have a couple other personnel-related items that are recommended. We do have a recommendation for overtime in the police department, adding that to the base budget, which is funded with one-time dollars this year, so adding that to their budget. And then also a recommendation related to constant staffing costs in the fire department. The other item I'll point out on this slide is that we do have the supplemental for the tenant improvements for our evidence facility, as mentioned by Brian earlier. That is the same amount that was discussed with the council probably about a month or so ago when you voted on purchasing the facility. And so this mechanism is just bringing that forward for next year's budget to fund that. So with that, I'll just...
Any questions on this? I've heard the word overtime, and every time something's said, so do any of you have a question on that? Joe?
Just more of a general comment on the fire inspector. I know there are some cities that we're looking to maybe trim that a little bit, and I think it's important, even in the public safety with officers. Proactive in public safety reaps benefits down the road. It's one of those things. You don't want to be reactive, because when you do, the problem has already occurred. So I appreciate that. I know we had some issues during the recession, not being able to keep up with. I appreciate this, and I'm in support of these positions.
Sherry?
Yes, I know we talked about the need of the police department for people, and obviously because it's changing what kind of cases and everything we do here. When would those be I guess, up and running? Because there's that longer delay, I guess, in hiring certain positions.
Yeah, I guess that's where we'd like to have kind of an overview, because we know that it's not been easy. One would think it would be with all the applicants, but it has not been. So I think a clear review on that will be very helpful to them. Thank you, Chief.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Yeah, that's been a challenge. As I spoke to you before, we currently have 5 openings for police officers. We have some recruitment challenges, and we try very, very hard to get those positions filled. Right now, from a previous recruitment, we're in the process of filling 3 to 4 of those. We are putting together another recruitment where this time, instead of just the laterals that are already certified, we'll look for some people that are already in the academy, partially through of their training program. So, it's our hope as soon as these positions would become funded, we already have recruitments underway and we can get them hired as soon as possible.
Can you share with the public a little bit about some of the difficulty that has, and I mean, they get up to a certain point and it looks like we have someone, and then further discovery, and that eliminates that person. So if you just kind of give the public an overview of that?
Yes, Mayor. When we start our recruitments, we've been getting an average of 30 to 40 lateral officers for our openings. We do testing, we do a written test, we do a physical agility test. Usually through the combination of those two, we lose close to half of those applicants. Either they don't show up for the testing or they don't pass one of those 2 phases. Then we go into the background process. And, we want the best quality applicants, not the ones that are having troubles in their agencies. So, we have polygraphs, we do psychologicals, all the typical background process, and during that process, we lose another half. So it's been consistent that usually by the time we establish a list, we're down to 4, 5, or 6 applicants. And also usually during that time, some of these people have applied elsewhere, other agencies will pick them up, so it has been a challenge.
Thank you. Was that helpful?
Yes, I just know with the staffing shortage you mentioned before, I was wondering how quick we could get the
Yeah.
2 new officers once it's
Yeah.
approved up to
And
you.
so that kind of shows you why that slowed up a
Takes so
little bit
long.
on the hiring. Any other questions? Bill? Yes.
Not for you, Chief, so. Chief Louisi?
Different chief, huh?
Yeah, the other chief. No sense in rattling off my question while you can't hear it or while walking up. It's a 2-part piece. First is on the entire fire prevention program. We've heard from you a number of times how you've worked to rebuild it, and how, the study that was done talked about it needing to be rebuilt, et cetera, and now we're staffing it. I'm wondering if it's of value to the council that we start to perhaps hear some update information on how that's going, how the numbers of inspections have improved since we're so far deficient. I'm trying to word this correctly. If it was as big a problem as we all tend to know that it was, perhaps getting an update on where it's and how it's progressing might be of benefit for us, say, 6 months down the road. I mean, you've got to get people hired, you've got to get things in place before we start talking about getting reports and efficiencies and all the rest of that. So I'm thinking farther on down the road, if that is something that makes sense, perhaps, since we're going to invest in it, we ought to find out what the result of that is.
Yeah, absolutely. At this time, we feel like we have probably our best data set that we've ever had in the fire prevention division. And I've actually been working with the deputy city manager on a monthly basis to review that data set, and we're starting to feel more and more comfortable with its reliability and accuracy of reporting. So absolutely we'll be able to provide and hopefully be able to show an impact with this position.
So are you waiting till the impact is at the point where it's, statistically will be helped?
Yeah, I think if we had asked for it now, the chief's been in place for a year and they've been rebuilt, it would have been, I don't want to say useless data, but it really would have been useless data at that point, because they didn't know what they had and they needed to get over to the top of the mountain. Now let's hike on. So, and I don't know what that time frame is, but I'm certainly not suggesting it needs to be within a month or but certainly not a year from now either, so.
Yeah, we can certainly look at it from a quarterly standpoint and submit that up in writing to show progress. And then, possibly come back in 6 months and have a quick work session or yellow paper for council.
I think I'm always a yellow paper fan, but just some way of us keeping
Yeah, we can
tabs
do
on
that.
that.
We can do that.
So my second question, and it's more of a general statement, and I had a discussion with the manager this afternoon. There's still a lot of, at least in my mind, and perhaps in Councilmember Pizzolo, and the reason that I drag him into this is we've been trying to work with the manager's office on figuring out the exact breakdown of the overtime at the fire department. And I'm concerned about adding another 70 on top of the ongoing until we know what's going on with the rest of it. That, I certainly don't want to do anything to strangle the organization from being able to perform, but I also don't want to just add another chunk to an ongoing fee that perhaps can be found when we dissect the rest of it and pull it all apart, and then we can find out where it's at. I understand the cause of the additional 70, but the number within the line called constant staffing is gigantic, and I'm concerned about adding to that.
Okay, now I'm confused. So you put in for overtime on this, so the explanation for that is?
Well, the explanation for that, Mayor, is last year when we were negotiating the MOU, Firefighters Union, there was a piece in there that they would be paid for vacation and sick time as parts of hours work, be paid at straight time for that. And when we were trying to decide what the impact would be to the budget, we had quite a bit of discussion that it would, what finance was proposing, it would actually be double that. So as we started to go through the first and second quarters of this fiscal year, with the first time seeing this contract, we started to realize quickly that we're going to probably be matching our initial thoughts that it was going to be double of what finance had added to that budget. So this $70,000 that we're requesting through the supplemental process this year is to meet that 150 that we had initially discussed a year ago. So that's really, so we're trying to make whole on our expenditures that within that line item.
And the genesis of my question is I understand that part of it, but if we parcel out that 150 from the whole amount, there's still a lot of amount left, and that maybe that 70 can be found elsewhere in there, in the amount, or at least for this year, make it a one-time, and then, because I think by this time next year, we will have a full understanding, I think with the new technology that we've added, with the telestaff, and the ERP system and the work that you're doing with the manager's office, then we'll have an idea.
We're monitoring it
We are monitoring the daylights out
in a
of
different
it.
way that we did before because of technology.
Yeah.
So
Now, the end result may be the same, I don't know, but I'm concerned about adding to the ongoing if we don't need to.
But then I have to say, now, I want some of you other joining this, I'm concerned if we don't do it right now, what the consequences will be. So somebody tell me what would be the consequences if we didn't do it right now and we waited until we had all that information next year. So I want to hear that first.
I'm suggesting just not funding it differently, funding it with one time, not ongoing.
Okay, but still funding it.
But still funding it. I'm
Okay.
not suggesting we
All right, I
slit
didn't
the throat,
understand
but
that. Okay.
somebody else now is going to
All right.
chime in.
Yeah, Mayor Lord and Councilmember Stipp. We can clearly do that if that's the council's wish. I would personally, as I look at it and as I've looked at this overtime issue throughout this past year, we do have a hard time tracking the overtime in our legacy system. And we recognize that time, but also in the analysis provided by the fire department that they're getting from their reports and the telestaff and so forth, I'm very confident that the amount of discretionary overtime available in that department is relatively low, and this is kind of needed to make sure we're able to keep the operations going from my perspective. And that's why I thought it made sense that we just correct the math on what we did a year ago, because it really was mathematical at that point in time. Correct that math so that we've got a clean slate as we move forward. As we move forward into a new ERP, the reality is the transition on that will be a year from now when we're having this conversation. If we're even transitioned in, that we have any data off the ERP, that would be shocking. And so you're talking a couple years down the road before we're going to get to the true handle on it from my perspective. We want to keep monitoring it because the overtime issue is very important, that we have a good handle on it. I like what they're doing at Fire with the telestaff program and that. And so if council directs it, we'll do it one time, at least I can spend
Well,
it.
I don't think we've directed that yet, but the question is, what are we taking away of the one-time money that we're going to do? So there's one-time money.
But the impact, as far as what adverse impact that would have in the budgeting process is, we wouldn't take away from any other program or activity. All that would happen is that next year, we would be back asking for that funding on an ongoing or one-time basis, as opposed to just continuing forward at that level. That's the only impact.
Joe?
There's not too much to add with what Larry just said. What happens is as one-time money, they still have the money, but it comes out of the base. So next year, if it's needed, they'll have to ask for it again as opposed to being part of the base. That's the difference. So if you make it one time, what Councilmember Stipp is saying, maybe they'll find $70,000 worth of savings, they won't have to come back. What Larry is saying probably not going to be the case yet, because they may not have the data, so they'll be back next year to ask it. But they still would have the money this year. It's just a matter of funding source.
Sherry?
I just want to make sure I have the handle on this. So Larry, what you're saying is the overtime is, I don't know if this is a proper word for it, you can correct me, structural. It's earned overtime. It is not discretionary or extra or above. It's simply because it wasn't calculated. We were off it's basically just, we were a little off on how we added it up.
Correct. The fire department has a lot of money in overtime, without a doubt. And there's numbers of causes of that overtime. And to put it in very simple terms, which I like to do because it is complex when you get into the firefighters, for each firefighter to work their regular schedule without missing a day, there is an amount of overtime that's built in. That part is structural. There was a change in the agreement last year of how they were compensated for certain overtime-related expenses, and it related to leave, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct? Yeah. And so what happened with that is there was a calculation done, but the calculation in my shop, not over there, in my shop, got divided by 2, basically. And that's part of why I'm recommending, well, we shouldn't have made that calculation. We should have had it at the higher amount a year ago. And Councilman Stipp is aware of that part. It's the policy question then gets to be, should we allow the $70,000 overtime to increase by that amount, or keep the feet to the fire? And where I'm concerned, I want to keep managing it regardless. And I don't think anyone's arguing against that.
So these aren't like extra hours. These are just the normal hours.
Yes.
What they have today.
Some of them are.
Well, the $70,000.
No, those
is-
$70,000 are, but the
Yeah.
total dollar amount of overtime is not all built-in overtime.
Correct.
No, that's what
No,
we're
that's
saying.
what I'm
It's
saying,
not.
to get the 70,000.
Just the 70?
That's what I'm
Yeah.
talking
Yeah.
about.
Yeah.
That's not like extra above, that's the mathematical issue.
No.
Okay.
But it does sit in the same pot.
And quite frankly, there's a little bit of a, I'm going to call it an accounting selfish side that I like it here. And that is because under our existing system, it's all going to get charged to the same place. And when you're asking about these numbers, that'll just create one more discrepancy between the budget and where it's getting charged, that we're going to have to manually develop a report to get you the information.
So it's not going to be on the system.
So it may cost us $70,000 to make it one.
Well, it isn't going to
But,
cost
I mean,
us $70,000.
But there's a cost associated with it. that
There is a cost
May not be worth it in the
associated
end.
with it. From my perspective, it's not worth it at the end. I don't think you gain the control that you're wanting to accomplish out of it.
Okay, then And that all makes sense to me since I originated the question, but I think what we really want to, at least I do, want to push forward is once we get the full strength of telestaff working and providing the data that I think we figured out the last time we met to get what we need, then that'll answer the question, where's it all going?
I think that's reasonable, and
Yeah.
I think it's transparent.
That's-
So
I'm looking for it.
I can't have a problem.
Thanks for working through that.
Agreeing with you on that one.
Agree.
Agree? Agree? Yeah. Agree? Sherilyn? Agree? Okay, you got that, okay?
Thank you.
Go ahead, Kim.
Yeah, any other public safety, or if not, I can move to the next section. Okay. The next area is development services, and you'll see we have a $3.7 million, and that is for the Development Services Department. Of that, we do have $100,000 that is a recommended one-time supplemental. In general, as far as the recommendations for new items this year, we do have one of our full-time positions in this area, and that is in the inspector position. And then other supplementals recommended relate to our continued implementation of the one-stop shop, that business-friendly approach. So that not only includes some training on the project docs and the electronic plan review, but also some modifications to that front counter area to make it more business-friendly and continue that effort. And then you'll see here also, we've talked about implementing the 2012 building codes, and so we do have recommended supplementals that allow for purchasing the new books and training the staff on those. So, any
Questions? Go ahead, Kim.
Next, we have engineering, and you'll see that this is broken down into two categories. We have the general fund area, and that really supports the divisions that support GIS and the project management and real estate area. And then we have our HERF, which we've talked about quite a bit as far as it being an enterprise fund, and that's really our streets program. So the general fund portion of that is $2.9 million. The HERF is $6 million, as we've talked about. In regards to supplementals in the non-HERF area, we are recommending a GIS analyst to support that division, which not only supports the level of service that we're doing
So the
today.
GI analyst will do what?
Yeah, they coordinate all of our maps, and that is not only for our internal use and planning, but also public safety and mapping out locations for our emergency response. But also, as we look to advance our asset management and implement the Lucidity program, really linking our infrastructure locations to that asset management to help us identify not only on a data basis, but also on a visual basis of where we would be performing maintenance and which areas require replacement and timing. So that would support that function. And then we also have two FTEs in the HERF area, and those are specific to traffic, and that is in the traffic operations and also our signal support. And then the other is not...
I'm sorry, but the public will be happy to see that.
Yes.
Yes.
Assuming that it works.
And then we're not asking for an FTE, but we are asking for one-time funding for our capital improvement plan in the form of project management support. And that is really to put another set of boots on the ground, if you will, in terms of moving our capital improvement program forward. And so we have a set of staff of 3 right now that really are out there managing not only the vertical projects, but the streets and also the utilities, the water and wastewater. And we want to continue to advance those, and so we're requesting one-time dollars to have another project manager for this next fiscal year to move those forward.
Joe?
Just a quick question on the pavement management side. When will they start picking back up on the Indian School
They did
pavement? Did they?
No, they've got one
I drove
lane.
it.
Already
Okay.
done it. The one lane. I'm sorry, I shouldn't be asking for it.
Yeah, I just drove it on my way down.
I drive that one, so,
Well, earlier today, I didn't think there was, go ahead.
which one little side there?
Good evening, Mayor and Council. I don't know the exact date. They were having a material supply issue at the plant. I believe it'll restart this week, but I don't have the exact, can't tell you exact date right now because we're
So it's not
trying
just
to
lines
wait for
for
the plant to be
tequila,
ready.
that they have, every different departments have a problem, huh? So
Right.
the exact material that is the
It was
Been in
a problem with
question?
the oil mixed in with to make the asphalt. There was a problem with this not meeting the specification, so they couldn't furnish the material, and they've been trying to remedy that.
Now,
So
did
just
we
as-
notice it didn't make specification, or did they know that before? I'm just curious.
That was revealed at the plant through
Okay.
their own testing.
Yeah, so it was revealed at the plant?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Dan.
Wait,
Nope.
Bill?
Kim, in one of the replies to my questions, we talked about projects that are potentially being deferred because we don't have this one-time CIP support. And there was a list of a couple of projects, but this was the,
Bill, can you do by number?
I am on page 12 of 21, question 14 of the packet that you were given earlier.
This one here, that
You want the
your
questions?
questions?
Yeah.
Oh, I thought
No.
we'd show the project there, so, okay.
Page 12 of 21.
Thank you.
Question 14. The second to last bullet. So have we deferred projects this current year already because of this?
We have not this current year that I'm aware of.
But we're anticipating that, and I realize we've got a lot of CIP coming up, so,
Especially in the utility area, we're seeing a much higher volume of utility projects, so that was a concern for next year.
okay, and this is and this is being proposed as one time.
Correct.
So we're anticipating that this theoretically will go away at the end of the year and we'll move forward. Okay.
The deferral that some of the projects
Just
have been...
announce who you are, so people that are
Oh,
listening.
Robert Brackley,
Robert.
Deputy City Manager. The projects that are being deferred are not necessarily because of the lack of oversight. It's because of project delays that cause them, either right-of-way, legal contracts that had to be signed. For those reasons, there is a considerable dollar volume that is being carried over. That will add to next year's workload, and that's the reason why this additional support is sought.
So what should have been done this year is pushing into next, doubled with what we're already planning to do.
That's correct.
Workload increase theoretically for a year.
That's correct.
Got it. Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you. Go ahead.
And with that, I've got a couple slides in the next section, our general government, and I think we could possibly get through those before we go to break, so I'll just move on to that area. The first slide focuses on the city manager's office and legal division in the general government area. City manager's office budget at $2.9 million. You will see in the recommended supplementals that this area does also have one of our recommended positions, the digital communications administrator. And that function is currently being supported with temporary funding right now. And as you know, this is a really big focus for us with our new website coming online and our new mobile application, as well as continuing our efforts in the social media area. And so this position would support that on an ongoing basis.
Is
And then-
this the position that's been part-time, or, I mean, that's been volunteer time, or whatever?
Yes, Mayor, Council.
Would you elaborate on that, please?
It's actually a paid full-time position, but they're considered a temporary employee. The difference is they're not regular, what some call a permanent employee, so we're just asking to convert it over to a regular staff instead of a temporary. It's important, we think, to keep this individual working for us. They brought a lot of value, and you know, as such, it's definitely justified for not only the web content, but as Kim pointed out, also on the social media and really myriad communications types of activities.
Joe?
And it's also my understanding, because I had a question on this one because of the title administrator, but it's technically reporting to the communications manager, is that correct?
Yes,
Yes.
Mayor, Councilmember Pizzillo, Vice Mayor Pizzillo, habits die hard, I guess. But it is. It will not be supervising employees, even though it has the title of administrator. so it is reporting the communications manager, which is Shireen Zaya.
Okay.
Are we ready to go on? Go ahead, Kim, you have a couple minutes.
Yeah, and then I'll just point out with legal, they are 1.4 million, and as you can see here, minimal supplementals in ongoing area, but really to support their training and membership, which they're seeing a cost increase. So we're adding to their base there.
So before we go to the general government, what is the time now? Somebody tell me, is it 5:30? Okay, we're going to take a break now, and we will be coming back to the regular meeting at the dais for 6 o'clock. So I just want you to all go ahead in the back and have your dinner that you're missing today, and we'll come back. Is everybody in agreement with that? Are we okay?
We come back, we'll come back.
We're going to go back there, yes. So the work session is now adjourned.
No,
And-
recess.
No, well, we can adjourn it because we're not coming back. We have to be back here for a 6 o'clock meeting.
But are we
So-
coming back after the meeting?
So you recess it.
Oh, so you want me to adjourn it after I come back from in there? Or do we just adjourn it now? And because it's a work session, and we're going to start the other meeting at 6 o'clock. So tell me what I'm doing. Get me straight, please.
Mayor Lord, you would recess this to continue the meeting
Oh,
after
so that it
the...
can, otherwise we
Yes.
can't do it after.
Right.
How clever you all, you lawyers are. Okay, we're going to recess this meeting, continue after.
Up at the dais, Doug? We just came.
Will they stay around for this?
Wally, are you staying on for this, or are you going? Yes, I will, Mayor. All right, thank you. So for those that are possibly listening at this hour, we are going to continue the discussion with Kim Bradford, interim budget and research manager on our budget. So we were talking about supplements at that time, is that correct?
Thank you, Mayor and members of the council. We are right in the middle of our departmental supplemental review. And just to remind, as far as the format, I'm just going to cover a few key pieces of information on the slides, and then really just open it up for any council discussion or questions, so we can receive direction on any follow-ups or items to evaluate further as we bring the draft budget back for consideration. So you'll see on this slide, we have our general government. This is the second part of that category, and this encompasses our city clerk's office, mayor and council budget, the municipal court, and what we call our citywide initiatives, or also our non-departmental area that covers several different initiatives throughout the city. For the city clerk's office, we have a proposed budget of $764,000, and you'll see on there that the recommended supplemental for this department for this year is a one-time funding amount of $155,000, and that is in the event that we need an election during next fiscal year that would cover both the primary and general election. Excuse me. As you know, there is some legislation that was proposed that would change the election cycle, and that is still unresolved, and so this is proactive planning in the event that we do have to hold the election that would not be spent if that timing does stand as it is today. The mayor and council budget is $305,000. The municipal court budget is $1 million. There were no supplementals recommended in those areas, so those are consistent with what we have established today. And then our citywide initiatives, as I mentioned, that's really encompassing several different areas that touch citywide initiatives. So we have funding in that area that is consistent every year that funds our outstanding obligations per development agreements. It also has funding for things like the symphony sponsorship that we have every year, and then also the parade funding. And what we have in there is a proposal for $10,000 one-time funding. And what that would do is establish an innovation fund. If you recall, we had been selected as one of 8 cities nationwide to participate in the Innovation Academy through the Alliance for Innovation. And we're just completing that process right now. And the project that the team has been working on is establishing a sustainable program. And so this fund will not only help with getting that program off the ground, but could also possibly serve as some seed money. And the concept is to start that off with some one-time funding, and then eventually, as we create efficiencies through that program, then future initiatives could be funded through savings identified in departments. So with that, I'll see if there's any questions on this area.
Question, anybody?
Just a,
Vice Mayor?
just a general comment. Is that 155 going to be enough?
Yes, Mayor and Vice Mayor Pizzolo, that is enough for both elections, if we need them.
Go ahead, Kim.
Support services, we have our Information Technology Department, Human Resources, and the Finance Department that fall within this category. Our proposed budget for IT is $3.3 million. I will point out that supplementals in this area do encompass 3 of the recommended new positions for next fiscal year. 2 of those are business analysts. One would focus on the asset management piece that we've talked about quite a bit, the Lucidity program and supporting that, as well as some of our other new applications that have come on board, such as Project Docs, which is the online plan review. And then the other business analyst would be associated with our new enterprise resource planning system. Back when we presented an update on that project a couple of months ago, this position was included in that proposal in the total cost of the transition. And what we will do is, we know that timing will be needed at some point next fiscal year. As you know, we're under evaluation for our new system right now, and so putting that in the budget for next year, and then we will work closely with our consultants, Barry Dunn, on the appropriate time to bring that position on board so they can help us with implementation. And then the third FTE in that area is associated with our infrastructure administration, and that's really making sure that as we advance not only our enterprise system but also those other applications that I mentioned, that we really have the structure that supports that, so they would help with maintaining the network and server piece of that supports all those applications. In HR, just a couple things to point out. We do have our wellness clinic provider is out for bid, and while that has not been completed yet, we do know there is an increased cost that will be associated, and so the supplemental recommended would allow us to absorb that cost. And then the other item I want to point out is in human resources, we have a proposal for a citywide learning management system, and this has been piloted in our fire department this year. It's called Target Solutions. And it's allowed us to bring internal some additional training at a low cost for our staff, and so really leveraging those resources. And so this proposal would not only sustain that training for fire, but also expand it citywide. And then in finance, the recommended supplemental is one-time funding of $25,000 for some procurement assistance to deal with some workload issues, and again, that's one time it would be used as needed.
Vice Mayor?
On the, Kim, on the citywide learning management system, is that the technology for internet training? Is that what that is?
Correct. That's a web-based enterprise system that supports our learning management. And not only assists with training, but also tracking, and is pretty robust as far as some of the skill sets that we have. So it would also help us know what are the skill sets that not only we already have in our employees, but that we identify and want to build up to.
So it also builds of all the all the classes and everybody has taken, is tracking that from an inventory standpoint as well.
Yes.
Okay.
Go ahead, Kim.
Yeah, you're surprised I don't have any questions.
I couldn't see you, so.
Quickly, on the public works side, this is the divisions that are supported by the general fund, so we'll get to the enterprise in just a moment, but this slide focuses on our fleet, which is an internal service fund, and that's $2.3 million. And then also our municipal services area, which is facilities and administration, and that's $2.4 million. In the fleet area, I want to point out again, we do have one of our recommended full-time positions in that area, which is a fleet mechanic. And that would allow us to address some of the performance indicators that you've been given as far as making sure that our available time for vehicles meets our performance measures. And then the other item to note in fleet is that the citywide parts and labor, you'll see those established as ongoing. And what we are doing with those is actually creating the line items in that department that supports the current level of service that we're providing today. What Fleet does as an internal service fund is they actually bill out departments for the service that they provide, and they have an hourly rate that they use to do so. And the revenue that they're generating today supports the costs associated with those supplementals, but they were not previously established as line items, and so that's what those supplementals are intended to do. And then in the facilities area, you'll see that the majority of our supplementals recommended in that area are one-time funding, specifically associated with the facilities master plan that we've talked about, as well as some signage for the City Hall complex specifically. That'll take any questions on this.
Trying to give him the smile at me. Go ahead, Karen.
Okay. Next, we have Parks and Recreation, and you'll see that we've separated this out into the general fund area, which is not only the administration, but the recreation programs, aquatics, and public art, and then the ballpark piece, which we've talked a little bit about earlier. In Parks and Recreation, we do have a couple of full-time positions recommended in that area. One is a management assistant, and that is really providing high-level analytical support to the entire department, all divisions, and that's in the form of supporting initiatives like the priority-based budgeting and the performance measures, as well as council actions and implementation of the Parks Master Plan that is just being completed. And then we also have a right-of-way worker position that's being recommended, and that will allow us to establish a new right-of-way crew in partnership with our Perryville program that we have in place today, so we'd be expanding that. Other recommended supplementals in the Parks and Rec area have to do with the Arts and Culture Strategic Plan implementation, some pool improvements, one-time funding to make improvements to the Loma Linda Pool, an after-school pilot program, and then also some maintenance and repair needs. In terms of the ballpark, I mentioned earlier this evening that there is a one-time supplemental recommended for the ballpark. The overall budget is proposed at 4.1, and that one-time funding is associated with some ballpark equipment replacement that does not fall under their capital replacement category. And so with that, I'll take some questions.
Question, Bill?
Yeah. All right. It's actually two parts on the same issue. We're, and I realize we received the answer to the question about, we listed it as a pilot program, but it's an ongoing expense. And I think that was an error. If I'm reading into this correctly, it's really it's an enhancement to an ongoing after-school program.
Correct, and it was termed pilot as it is a new program that's being put out there, but it is felt by staff that there's a demand out there and there's a need, and so it would establish it as an ongoing program.
Okay, and so here's my bigger concern with that particular program. It is a pilot program to provide after-school programming for a charter school. And a charter school, while financed partially with state money, is also a private enterprise, is it not? Therefore, we're theoretically supplementing a private enterprise with city funds for an after-school program, which we could probably debate until at least midnight, and then after that, the rest of the question really ends up being, once we open the door for one private charter school, aren't we opening it for all the rest of them?
And didn't we have a request for a public school?
Yeah,
Somebody on the council?
this has just got slippery written all over it.
Well, we looked at it strictly from a standpoint of providing opportunities for our residents that don't have access to an after-school program. Most of the public schools in our area do have after-school programs that the schools run. So in the charter schools, there is a need for our residents to have access to after-school programs. So that we figured that's where we would start.
And I don't blame you one bit at all, and I think this probably ends up becoming a philosophical discussion, but since a charter school is actually for-profit, I personally think we should really be rethinking moving forward on this. And again, if we do it for one, there's a number of charter schools in our community that we're going to do it here, we're going to end up doing 2 or 3, 4 more times, and I think there's an issue, and I'm not sure from a legal standpoint, because obviously I only sit next to a lawyer, I'm not one, but, you know, is this truly, does this fall under the gift issue?
Sarah?
Councilmember Stipp, we have not been asked to look into this issue, but I would have concerns about this as being violative of the gift clause, although if it's a program that's open to, it's really not for benefit of the school per se, although it certainly is a benefit when they're trying to attract students. But, you know, if it's only limited to the school, the students at that school, you might have some issues. Again, we haven't been asked to look into it. We can look into it to see. But there certainly are gift clause implications that should be considered before pursuing this.
So,
Yeah.
I mean, we got to provide direction, but you know,
Well,
if I need to make a motion, I'll make a motion that we look into this before we approve this being in the budget.
I think it's probably the wisest thing to do.
It's a work session, so
Everybody got,
Yeah.
okay, I'm looking at you all. Yes, look into this first before. I think so too, yeah. I think
Yes,
we all
we'll
agree
note that
that
for
we need to look
follow-up.
into this first.
Thank you.
Nathan, on
Now,
the flip
yeah.
side of that, I'm supportive of the after-school program, and I love the idea that you're trying to reach the need, and it has nothing to do with that. I'm just worried about the charter school
Yeah,
implication.
and I do worry about the issue that was, and I think I can speak about it, that was asked of a council person at Avondale School for us to provide a program, which was $50,000 program for them. And so we had some legal issues with that. I mean, I think we just need to really have a
Tread lightly.
strategic plan on this and look at it, how we can help, but,
Well said, thank you.
all right. Go ahead, Kim, thanks.
Okay, if there's nothing else in the parks area, this is the last slide as far as department-specific, and this does focus on our enterprise funds. Water, we have the $5.7 million operational budget. We have wastewater at $5.1 million and sanitation at $5.8. What I'll point out as far as the supplementals, in the water area, we do have a proposed water conservation partnership project, and I believe you've heard Mark Holmes speak on that a couple different times as far as the partnership along Litchfield Road that we're looking at as not only a beautification but also a water conservation project, and so the supplemental would support that project moving forward. In the wastewater area, you'll see that the supplementals are all one-time funding, and that's really focused on creating some efficiencies through addressing deferred maintenance and replacement needs, as you'll see by the list there. And then in sanitation, we do have the last of the recommended new positions, that is a sanitation worker in that area, as well as the other big item in the ongoing supplemental is related to our waste management contract. Excuse me. And the expected cost increase that we had received notice of a couple months back per our contract.
Bill?
Not a question, just a statement for, I think, Mark in the back. I asked the question about why do we need the extra person, even though we've talked about the temporary staff, et cetera, and talked about our reduction of this service a couple of years ago, and we didn't do anything with the, we didn't lose anybody as a result of it. The good that came out of my question, ironically 21, was I had no idea what we had done with these folks, where they had moved, that we had actually eliminated the 4 positions and repurposed them, that the staff was actually at 2. So having asked the question, I am a lot smarter about sanitation today than I would have gotten from the 45-minute-hour presentation that you did a couple of weeks ago based on this one question. So I appreciate the level of detail that was in the answer. And as we go forward, I had no idea where we were at, so I'm good to go.
Okay, go ahead, Kim.
So with that, now having gone through the department-specific, these are some citywide initiatives that are typically funded as either one-time or ongoing, and we couch them as kind of budget initiatives, so not department-specific. I have broken them out into things that we typically do, and so I've called those standing items, and we'll cover one time and then go to ongoing. And then broken out some new initiatives for this year, so council's aware of what is new for fiscal year 15. So on the one-time funding, the standing initiatives, you'll see the standing items of fleet replacement, IT reserve, our risk reserve, and then the city manager contingency. Those are all items that we fund every year, and these funding levels are consistent with what we have done in the past. And this is one-time funding to establish those for fiscal year 15. The new item on this slide is the last item, and that's our replacement reserve. And you'll see that we have proposed one-time funding of $5 million for fiscal year 15. And that's really to establish the replacement fund, as we've talked a lot with the council about, as has been in our city strategic action plan and also the city manager objectives, about really focusing on taking care of what we have. And so with the departments working on establishing asset inventories and then maintenance and replacement schedules, this is the complementary piece of that will allow us to move those plans forward as we have our arms around them and start to prioritize. That will also give us a sense of how far will this get us, what do we need to do in subsequent years to make sure that we are adequately funding all those replacement needs. And it's important to point out that this covers many different areas in the city, so it's not only our streetlights, traffic signs, parks and irrigation replacement, and also playground equipment. We've talked about that quite a bit. Medians and plant and tree replacement funds, so we're not submitting supplementals every single year. And then also our rolling fleet, which you see we have the fleet replacement, and that's really focused on our actual vehicles, but we actually have quite a large inventory of small equipment, whether it's mowers or golf carts and other things that need to be replaced, that we want to capture within this replacement fund.
Well, I just have a comment, and I'm going to turn over to Joe because this is his subject, but I know it was needed on the replacement, and we've talked about it many times, that we get ourselves in a position, and there's a need there, we don't have the money to do it. So I know, Joe, this is your bailiwick. So, Joe?
No, just a question. These are the monies that are going into the reserves?
Right. This
Going in?
This $5 million will establish.
No, the other stuff, the $2 million?
Oh, yes, I'm
Okay.
sorry. Yeah, so the $2 million would focus on replacing the fleet vehicles that have been identified for fiscal year 15, and then IT reserve is for hardware replacement, and then risk is the legal reserve.
So that's actually being spent? Okay.
Yes.
All right. The $5 million is being set aside for future?
Right, and that is to make sure that as we get our arms around the bigger picture, outside of just those three areas and on some of those more detailed asset management plans, that we have funding to move those forward next year.
What do you expect the fund balance to be after money is spent, new money goes in, at the beginning of July 1?
Are you referring to on the existing ones?
Yes.
On the existing ones, the IT reserve going into that year is about 1.8.
Okay.
The fleet replacement, I believe, is about 2 million. And the risk reserve, I believe, is at about, is about 250,000, and we wanted to get it back up to $500,000.
Okay, and city
The
manager...
city manager contingency, actually, that balance was 500,000 this year. We're carrying 250 over. That one, we don't normally do that, but that'll bring it back up to, we're only putting 250 in.
And then the $5 million is, what is the, address the other issues as far as the reserves for capital replacement throughout the city?
And that, what the intent of that is, I like to call it kind of seed money for it.
Okay.
As the asset management programs are developed, we may want to move that money into specific asset management programs. And I would hope that throughout this next fiscal year, that we would actually spend some of this money under programs that are designed, parks, for example, have been doing a lot of work in this area. You saw some of
Right.
it. I would like to hope that we will actually be able to do some of that maintenance work that they've been identifying.
Okay. Well, I appreciate it being set up, because you know how I feel about the replacement, because money's got to be chased from somewhere, and if you have a reserve there, that just allows you to, not have to draw it from your ongoing or somewhere else, so I appreciate that.
Bill?
With that reserve replacement, have you started to, or have you already established some criteria for what's in and what's out? I'm listening to, we keep rattling off, the stuff in parks, the mowers and the this and that, and I keep thinking about, I'm going to call it motorized equipment that the fire department has. And then I think, well, okay, that's them. How does that relate to the PD? Are we talking about weapons? Are we talking about personal protective equipment? I know we've got some stuff in there for some Kevlar and for some helmets and whatnot. So how far down is this replacement reserve going to go? Have we started down that path yet?
We've had considerable discussion on it, and part of the reason we haven't assigned it out is because we recognize on the replacement side of the equation, whether it be infrastructure or equipment, that there's a lot that may have been underserved. Now, some of them that you've described, I think that we have done in the budget appropriation process, and we're not trying to change that as you get to what I'll call the smaller departmental items. But I think as we start looking at it, we've heard for several years about, are we maintaining the medians, for example, that have been developed at a standard, and are we maintaining them? And this is really intended to start asking those questions seriously, because we're putting money aside for it, and to just develop a process of doing that. So the first half of the task will be identifying those programs and then moving the money to meet those particular needs.
Yeah, to me, it would make sense if you establish a dollar amount on a piece of equipment, so you're not getting the $2,000 this or the $1,000 that, but the $10,000.
Correct.
That there's some, so I'll be, is that something that when you guys figure that out in the next budget cycle, we'll get an update on that, or?
Possibly even during this year. That's where I was saying I'm hoping that some of this gets spent this year and that we are able to develop some parameters. For that very reason, I know, I throw parks out as an example. They've done a lot of work in this area. Now it's time to start bringing that together. But other areas within there, not just parks, but the other, I'll call them public works areas, a lot has been spent on that effort. Not so much maybe the public safety side, because I think a lot of that's either been on the fleet replacement or has been in their budgets. But that's where the question gets out to the whole organization, and that's the intent.
Well, I think that's what brings my concern forward is this year there's a supplemental to replace all of the thermal imaging cameras for the fire department to the tune of like $75,000. That's a big,
Correct.
That's a big dollar amount, and it clearly could not be absorbed within their budget, et cetera. So I just use that one as the example, of course, of what I'm most familiar with. So I appreciate the information.
Joe?
And Larry, won't the asset management system, once that gets up and running, you got the life cycle of all your various assets, you get a better handle on what percentage of this fund is being funded and what better money you need to be set apart. Not only that, scheduling it, because now your asset management system will tell you what's depreciating it, at what rate, so.
Correct.
Is it-
And it is multiple asset management systems that we want to look at.
Okay.
Go ahead, Kim.
These are the ongoing budget initiatives, and the first one that you'll see there is one of our standing initiatives. As you recall, we had a policy direction a couple years ago to continue to proactively set aside capacity in our base budget every year to address our Public Improvement Corporation bond debt service in 2019 in the event that we do not receive reimbursements from the Arizona Sports and Tourism Authority. And so we are in the third year of that proactive funding plan. Each year we're setting aside $680,000 capacity in our base budget, and so that $680,000 is what you see here. And then I've noted on the bottom that where we are at today is at $2.04 million in our base budget in our plan to build up to 4.7 in fiscal year 19. In terms of new items, we have two areas that we are seeking to incorporate. First is family medical leave coverage. What we have seen, experienced in departments is when we have critical positions that go out under the Family Medical Leave Act, we may need to backfill that position. And because when positions are out on that leave, we are continuing to pay their salary, and so if we have positions that need to be backfilled, we are having to fill them with contract or temporary part-time, but there is no savings in the department personnel budgets to cover that. And so we are proposing establishing $100,000, and again, this is in the non-departmental, and then that would be used as departments go through the justification process, because as I mentioned, it would be used for critical backfill, because sometimes we have situations that maybe other people can just absorb the duties during that leave period. And then the other item established in the ongoing is grant match. We currently have $35,000 in our citywide initiatives budget to serve as match funds for grant opportunities that come in. And as you just heard, we've got a grant opportunity, and the $35,000 doesn't cover that. And we're seeing more opportunities, and so what we're proposing is adding $55,000 to that line item, which would bring it to a total of $90,000 citywide for grant matching opportunities.
Vice Mayor?
Yeah, just a general coverage. That family medical leave, would that reside in HR? Is that where where's the non-departmental money?
The non-departmental is actually, it's separate from human resources. It's just non-departmental, and it has some of those citywide funds. And the approval for that fund actually goes through the city manager's office.
Okay, that was my second
And so
question.
that's
Okay.
where that review process will go through, and then it's actually moved to departments upon approval.
Okay.
Go ahead, Kim.
Okay. I'm going to wait to cover some of the follow-up at the end, but I'll just move right to the capital improvement plan, if that's okay with the council. Just as a reminder, we did start discussion on the CIP, our 10-year capital improvement plan, at the retreat in November when we had some direction on strategic areas to address. And then we had a work session on March 3rd where we reviewed the initial draft, talked about not only the first year projects that are proposed, which are those that receive actual allocations in the budget, but also our 10-year plan, which is reviewed every year as part of the budget, but just making sure council understood how our infrastructure improvement plan was folded into that, how funding was being allocated to support growth projects, but also some of those discretionary areas. And so what I'll do is I'll touch on the changes that were made to the plan from the March 3rd work session. I'll talk about the 10-year plan and what that looks like in terms of the types of projects that are in there, and then also the funding sources, and then really focus on those projects that are recommended for fiscal year 15. As I mentioned, those are the ones that actually receive appropriations in the budget adoption process. So these are the key changes that we made to the plan since the March 3rd work session. If you recall, we had a lot of discussion on the Loma Linda Park. We do have a project that is listed as park improvements, which is funded at $250,000 a year, and that allows the Parks Department to evaluate what is the most pressing need, not only according to Parks Master Plan implementation, which is upcoming, but also as you saw during their department presentation, how they evaluate metrics and how our current parks are performing and where they want to invest those funds. We talked about Loma Linda, which had previously been established in an adopted CIP, and the request was to at least reflect one of those $250,000 associated with Loma Linda at a timing that was appropriate in discussions with the Parks Department. So you will see that in year 3 of the plan. We did list that out separate, and it is called Loma Linda Park Improvements. And then on our unfunded list, we do have the remainder of that master plan implementation, again, to meet the goal of making sure that is not lost in the context of future discussions on the capital improvement plan. As I said, this is revisited every year. So those changes were made to the plan. We also clarified, if you recall, we had some discussion on the Indian School road improvements between Saraville and Loop 303. And in the infrastructure improvement plan, that was listed as expansion to 4 lanes, which caused some confusion. And that has been corrected to widen to 6 lanes, because we do have the expansion to 4 lanes currently funded, will be under design this summer, and then will be completed, I believe, in February next year is when it's slated to be done. So the project in the CIP will expand that to 6 lanes. It will just build on the outside, so we don't have to tear up what we're doing today. And then the other change that we made is, if you recall, we had in purple highlighted where we are allocating those one-time funds from the ballpark PIC debt service set-aside, and that was directed to have half of those revenues in our CIP funding source. And we dedicated that to our multi-gen community center, and that was shown starting in fiscal year 18. And what we did is we actually showed every year those funds apply to that project, and so that way it's very clear to everyone that those funds are associated with that project per the council direction, and it's not saved up and then it doesn't show up anywhere until fiscal year 18. So as we have that capacity each year, that cash that we build up, that is being applied to that project. But the total amount of funding and the timing for that project remains the same from what was presented on the 3rd. Any questions on that?
Yes, Bill?
I've got, on that, on the multi-gen facility, if I'm understanding you correctly, we're holding, I'm going to use 10 o'clock language. We're holding back money in each of these years with construction anticipated to start when?
Yeah, fiscal year 18 is the first year that construction is anticipated to start, to have about a year construction period. What we are doing is, that's the same funding that was associated with the project before. It just didn't show up anywhere until fiscal year 18. But we are actually, the funding source that we've identified for that, we're actually having cash each year between now and that time. And so it's showing on the plan as applied to the project versus waiting until fiscal year 18 to show it.
Okay, so it'll be in its own account.
Right.
If you will. All right. Second question on this slide was this Indian School to Saraville thing. We're talking about, and what I'm most concerned about is doing what government does best, and that's building something, then going in and tearing it out. So you're talking about building it wide with the fat median, and then coming back in whenever the next 23, cutting that center part of the median out like we are planning to do down Bullard or McDowell, or are we talking about no curb and gutter on Indian School between Saraville and the 303, and then widening it to add that in? What are we talking about?
There are 2 lanes that are currently there that have just been paved, and I think they're on the south side of the center line of the future roadway. So they're going to be added to the outsides of those 2 lanes to come to 4 lanes. So I think it's two lanes to the north and, or 3 lanes to the north, 2 lanes to the north, 1 lane to the south. My math is wrong. So a total of 4. That's how you get to the 4. So the 2 lanes that are out there will be saved, and they'll be added to either north and south sides. And then at the 6 lanes, when in the subsequent year, when the capital outlay scheduled improvement will bring it out to 6, it'll be the extreme north and south lanes with the curb at that time. So nothing will be lost.
Is this we're planning median like all down the whole rest of Indian School? Or is this just road?
There's no median at that particular section.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
And that, where the median ends is kind of where it ends at, it actually ends at Saraville.
That's correct. And
So the gateway to our community, I'm just going to say it this way, so the gateway to our community from the 303 is going to be an unmedianed 6-lane road until you get to Saraville, and then we're going to divide it?
I believe we'll verify that there is a median there. I believe that there is.
Because at some point, and we've talked about this, and it came up originally that there were several of us that said, hey, look, this is going to be this is one of our western entry points into the city, and we need to dress it up more than it is, and of course, we're doing that by paving it, but we've pushed this project full completion all the way out to 23, which is theoretically, almost 10 years from now, and we've moved up a lot of other projects that, for one thing or another, have perhaps just as important or a lesser importance to economic development for our community. So I'm just looking to make sure we've got that all the way through, or there's something we can do in the meantime. If we do medians and we're fine and we push that whole thing out to 25, because we're not adding it, because all we're doing is adding outside lanes or cutting up the middle, maybe that solves the problem, I don't know.
We'll follow up with that.
Thanks.
This chart shows the 10-year plan, and so you'll see by fiscal year the different types of projects that are planned each year. And just a couple of things to point out, you'll see that throughout that 10 years, we have about 73% of the funding goes toward projects that involve our infrastructure, our water, wastewater, and streets. And that really is a result of the infrastructure improvement plan that we have just adopted, and the funding source for those is our development impact fees, which I will go through in just a moment. But then regarding the rest of the plan, we have about 20% of the funding in the 10 years is going toward either technology or facility projects. And again, we do have our City Hall and then also Police Operations Building anticipated within the 10-year plan. And then we also have the parks improvements that I mentioned, as well as public art program. And just to touch on the funding, you will see, again, over the 10 years, it is a $372 million plan. That very large orange piece is our development impact fees, and that is about 2/3 of the funding for that 10 years. The general fund is $43 million of that 10-year funding plan, and the funding source for that is we do dedicate our half of our construction sales tax to the capital improvement plan, and then we may also dedicate some fund balance, whether when we discuss every year with the council what the priorities are for the projects moving forward. And then, as I mentioned, we do have a couple of bond issuances that are contemplated within the 10 years. They are farther out in the plan, so those will be evaluated each year through the budget process. But the general obligation bonds, you'll see there are $41.4 million. That is allocated toward the City Hall project, which is anticipated for fiscal year 20 completion. That is in accordance with evaluation currently as far as when we would have the capacity to sell bonds in accordance with our current policy, which is that we will not have a tax rate of $1.60 or higher. And so those bonds, as I said, they're a little bit farther out, and we would evaluate whether we're in compliance with the policy or if the timing should change if we see conditions change. And then we do have in the last year of the plan some enterprise bonds. There is a water campus project, and that will be evaluated both in terms of funding source and timing as part of our utility rate study. And then, as I mentioned, I just wanted to touch on and spend a minute on the projects that are proposed for next fiscal year. Those are the projects that will receive allocation as part of the budget adoption. Our total projects for fiscal year 15 are almost $28 million. We do have the arts funding, and that would be $60,000, and that is proposed in conjunction with recommendations from the Arts and Culture Commission as far as any arts projects that would move forward. The parks, which I've talked about as far as our general parks improvements, but we also have median enhancements that we reviewed. There's 4 key areas of the city where we have unimproved medians that we would move forward next fiscal year. Our enterprise resource planning project that we've talked quite a bit about, that has $4.5 million next fiscal year for actual software purchasing and implementation during next fiscal year. And then our police operations building, fiscal year 15 has $3.9 million allocated towards that project. And then there is recommended funding of $3 million in fiscal year 16, so we can get phase 1 of that building open by 2016. Streets, as I mentioned, we have significant streets projects that are funded by our development impact fees, and that also does include a couple of traffic signals and also fiber projects, which we have a matching program with the Maricopa Association of Governments, so we would continue that program. And then in terms of water and wastewater, we do have projects that are primarily funded by our development impact fees and noted for growth. And we do have one little slice up there in orange that's a developer contribution, and that is funding that we have today that would build our new well and treatment facility. And so that's a summary of the projects that would move forward next fiscal year with the adoption of the plan as presented. And I'll just see if there's any questions before I move to debt. No, go
Just
ahead.
general, the developer contribution, is that Australia
Yes.
for the water and
Yes.
sewer? Okay.
Go ahead, Kim. Okay. And then quickly, 2 slides on debt, and then I'll do some summary. As you know, we want to just kind of cover where we are with the city's debt, not only in terms of the overall picture, but what our debt service obligations are for fiscal year 15. So you'll see we have $298 million in outstanding debt obligations today. That is down 4% from what we had this fiscal year. Our Public Improvement Corporation bonds, those are the bonds that are associated with our ballpark project. And then we do have water and sewer obligations, and that is funded by our enterprise funds, so those are self-sustaining. Our improvement district is $41 million, and as I'll talk about on the next slide, we have, I think it's about a $3.5 million payment, but the revenue source for that is the landowners within that improvement district, so that's a pass-through on the part of the city. And then our general obligation, which is funded by our property tax, our secondary property tax, and that's for bonds that have previously been sold. And so this is the picture of what it looks like as far as our obligations for payments and where we would be paying them from. Just shy of $26 million for fiscal year 15. As I mentioned, we have the utility funds that are funding the water and wastewater obligations, the improvement district, which is the pass-through, the general fund, which is the ballpark debt service that we talk about as far as the transfer to the ballpark fund for those payments, and then, as I mentioned, our secondary property tax, which funds our general obligation bonds. So if there's no questions, yeah.
Just
go ahead.
one. On the general fund, 6.8, what's the, ballpark's what, 5.3? What's the 1.5?
Vanita.
Vanita? Okay.
Before I talk about next steps, I just wanted to kind of highlight some things that I had noted as far as follow-up for the next iteration of the budget. I did note that we wanted to continue to communicate on the ballpark fund, what those costs are associated with the operations that are funded within other departments, so as we give presentations or present information that's included. We talked about the fire prevention and asked for a quarterly report on how those inspections are going, not only with the new recommended FTE, but as we get the volunteer program up and running and how we are making progress on those inspections. In terms of the constant staffing, same thing, we had some discussion on that. I did not get direction to change as it's proposed today, but that we will continue to report out as we implement telestaff and those overtime reports that we're getting to make sure that we are closely managing our fire overtime and what's causing that. I had a note regarding Indian School, the repaving project that's going on right now, and just informing the council of the status of that. We will be following up on the pilot program for the after-school recommendation, and we can follow up on that next week when we present the draft budget, because that is an ongoing supplemental recommended, so we'll give you an update on the legal and then what our any recommendations are in terms of that. And then the replacement funds, so we will continue to bring information back to the council probably during this fiscal year as far as when we get our asset management plans in place, how we anticipate using that $5 million during the next fiscal year. We will also, the last item that I have is on Indian School, what is the status of a median for the future from the 303 east on Indian School?
Questions?
Just, I'm the one who
Bill?
initiated the the issue about, or the question about the fire prevention stuff, you mentioned you were going to report out quarterly. I did not ask that it be that frequent, that we at least just get an update when the data starts coming in, and so I don't want to overstate that we've got to get under this
Okay.
quarterly deadline. But I think on the overtime thing, that should be quarterly, and I think we've been getting it that way, so
Right.
that may have been
Okay, yes,
wires
thank
crossed
you.
that way.
Thank you for the
Thanks.
clarification.
Any other questions?
Thank you, and Mayor, I'll just point out, I appreciate the dialogue and the questions and all the direction that we've received to get us this far. As was mentioned at the beginning of the work session, we do have a public budget forum that is being scheduled for this Wednesday at 6 p.m. at this facility. We will be going through the draft budget. We've been going through it in components, and so that will be an opportunity to review it with the public in total, and then we will bring that budget back to the council on May 5th for that full review. So those are upcoming steps.
Good. Well, Kim, thank you. It's always impressive.
Thanks.
And very clear, and we really appreciate how you're handling this, so thank you very much. Okay, oh gee, I covered it up here. Anything from the city manager? We want to go home, don't we? It's 5 after 10. Well, quickly, our next meeting will be a work session on May 5th at 5 o'clock, and let me see, and then the next